I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. She sits in front of the man who raised her, served as her role model, and supported her throughout life's most challenging moments. And she misses him. She touches his face, holds his hands, searches his empty eyes, but still she misses him. These are words by my guest today, Karla Hult. Karla Hult is an award-winning journalist, and she is also a daughter. And in her words, started a marathon, which is called Alzheimer's, with her father. Through this 9-year journey, Karla's family experienced all of the challenges, grief, decisions, and moments of joy with her father. This became her motivation to create So Many Goodbyes. With So Many Goodbyes, Karla shares her story. She is a public speaker. She provides workshops for family caregivers, older adults, and senior living communities. And she offers mentorship to families that are currently in the throes of this disease. She has a heart to bridge the gap of communication between families and caregivers. Today we had the opportunity for Karla to share this story and how her father's diagnosis changed her and her family. The truth about Alzheimer's, what are some of those staggering numbers? What are all of the goodbyes that we experience when we walk through this with our loved one? Where Karla sees those pressing needs for support are, how sharing her family story has opened doors for others to do the same, and how she is hopeful in the movement of awareness around Alzheimer's and the initiatives that she has seen in this space. Karla has an amazing network of support and people that she's pulled information and education from. Karla shares the words, "We're in this together, and you are not alone." I'm honored to have this interview with Karla and highlight the wonderful work that she's doing, not only nationally, but in my community of Minnesota as well. Here is my interview with Karla Hult. Hi, Karla. I'm thrilled that you're joining me. It's wonderful to finally meet you. You are an award-winning journalist as well, so I hope I can share as beautifully as you do with all of us. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. It's honestly an honor, and this will be an amazing conversation. I'm already confident of that fact.
Yeah, I am too. I'm looking forward to it. I want you to share your story. That is a big part of the work that you're doing now, your passion behind using your voice to bring change and awareness. And it's so meaningful that you have a place to do that. So your father was your foundation. And tell us more about that, how his diagnosis changed your life, your family's life, and brought you to where you are today.
Thank you again. So, my dad was my foundation. He was a remarkable human being. He grew up in St. Paul's East Side, and he played hockey and he went fishing, and they had kind of a challenged childhood, not a lot of money in the home. His dad and mom divorced at a time when that wasn't too common, but he and his twin brother and his 3 other siblings, they all overcame and they lived beautiful lives. They raised wonderful families. They had really successful careers, and they served their community. So he served his church, he served his hometown. And of course, he always was the first to respond if you had a call or a need of any kind. And so he was just a true servant at heart. And I just looked up to him. He was my moral compass. He would be the person I would call if I was in a crisis or had a large question or just needed some reassuring words or guidance of any kind. And he was funny and so moral, so ethical, so kind. He was so kind. And in fact, I reference often the fact that at my wedding, he toasted my husband and me with a simple toast. He said, "I have 3 pieces of advice for your marriage and for life." And he said they are: be kind, be kind, be kind. And that just summarized his essence and how he lived and how he treated me and raised me as his daughter. So I was really blessed and fortunate. It was back in 2010 that we started what ultimately was my dad's last marathon. He was a marathon runner, but the last marathon was his Alzheimer's marathon. And it just happened to coincide with me becoming a new mother. So I was pregnant with my first daughter when we first started seeing the signs. And what ended up happening is that we were challenged and overwhelmed at every milestone, every stage of the disease. And we struggled. We struggled because of that daily grief that hits you in small waves and in large waves, as you're saying, as I often say, so many goodbyes. You're saying goodbyes to the versions of the person who raised you and who you love so fiercely. And so it was this long, drawn out process. And I really struggled emotionally. And I even struggled, despite me being a reporter, despite having a sister who's a lawyer, with really recognizing where are the resources and where do I turn right now as we are experiencing this overwhelm. So that is how our journey went along. And again, my heart broke at every stage. And it was in 2019, March 28th, that my dad finished that final marathon. And anyone who's lost a loved one knows that that can be just soul shaking, ground shaking. And it truly shook me at my core, and my heart did break, because I think the course of the Alzheimer's disease is such that you are so exhausted by the end that you don't have the energy or resources or capacity to deal with that final wave of grief. And so it can cloud everything, and it can also shake a little bit of your identity if you've been a caregiver for so long. I should pause here because I know I'm going on,
Oh,
but
no, yes.
it's really truly
Mhm.
recognizing that my dad was just such an incredible person. And I think ultimately, when I stepped back, when I allowed myself that moment after he had passed to just process my grief and my loss, I think I was still so stunned by the fact that he deserved better, as do the 6.5 million Americans who live with us today, as do the 55 million people throughout the world who are living with dementia deserve better. And I felt, to honor him and his legacy, I wanted to reach out and uplift those who are also on this journey today. And so that's really the long version of what the inspiration for my story is honoring how he always served others. And I'm just trying to take our challenges and pay that forward, recognizing that in some situations, it's not that easy for folks, not just because of this cruel disease, but because perhaps they don't have the close relationship that I had with my dad, which I recognize I was very blessed and even privileged to have that kind of positive and strong dynamic. Or they may not have the kind of job that allows you to leave if your dad is leaving his care facility and you need to emergently respond. Not everyone has the capability of that. So again, wanting to help uplift others and make a difference for others who might be on this journey as well today, and who are struggling ever so understandably right now.
Yeah, you are doing just that. And in all that you share, your kindness does exude out. I've witnessed it, and I know that he would be so proud of you, and he is. And I'm sure your family is also appreciative of you taking something that was really hard and really challenging, and we mold that, right? It moves us into doing bigger and incredible things to share that message. So it is so appreciated. And I know families, I know that I find parts of myself in other people's stories. And that's what you're able to do, is create a place where families can go, oh my gosh, that's me. Or I had to deal with that. Or I have a complicated dynamic with understanding what Alzheimer's is and how challenging that is. So I think it's important that we continue to share, continue to let people know that they're not alone. You talked about noticing some of those signs that your dad was experiencing. What were some of those where you thought, okay, this is not normal aging, this is concerning?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was 7 months pregnant, and he had had a shoulder surgery. So he was in the hospital and had received pain medication during the course of that surgery, narcotics, which studies have shown that there is a correlation between narcotics and exacerbating or even previewing what's to come on the journey. So during that short hospital stay, he became delusional and super confused and was even accusatory with my mom and me because we were really present and would only listen to my husband. And, it was just really hard to reach him. It was somewhat temporary, but we filed that away because we knew, and we did, a simple Google search brings you immediately to a New York Times article about a medical study that in fact shows the correlation between what narcotics can preview and what will actually end up happening. So the summer after my daughter was born, then we just noticed his continued confusion, his repetition, his inability to find the right words. And he had been such an eloquent man. And so just seeing him struggle broke my heart, and I didn't want his pride to be hurt. And eventually he was in fact diagnosed with aphasia as well, which isn't always common, of course, with the disease, but it certainly can happen. Some people certainly have that as well, the inability to remember the right words. But then another really kind of pivotal moment was when my sister was on sabbatical, and she and her husband, he's a professor, she's a lawyer, and they were living overseas. And so we were flying overseas to Morocco, where they were living for a short time. And we were with my little baby at only 5 months. And my dad traveled with me because my mom had gone ahead to spend some quality time with my dad. And I had to walk him through the airport process of, okay, this is where you show your passport, this is what you do. And it was honestly somewhat like having a child with me. And that was certainly not the case of my competent and smart dad and my world traveler dad. I mean, he wasn't an extensive world traveler, but he did travel with my mom, and they made the most of their retirement years before his journey began. So it wasn't his first trip. It would have been familiar if not for this disease. And so when we were there and he was really struggling to just navigate this new environment, that was another sign. And so it just continued. And of course, our family, like so many families, experienced a lot of denial. So that's where I had to work in the messaging of, okay, how do I address my dad, who's so proud and who deserves his dignity and his respect and our respect for him. And so trying to figure out how to message with him as well. It was really hard those first months. Unbelievably difficult.
It's so hard. That's where part of that grief comes in too, when we see our loved one not being able to do all the things that they loved or speak the way that they spoke, and parts of that start to chip away at our hearts and our souls, and we're seeing that there's so many goodbyes where we have to mourn the loss of the person that we've interacted with. And it's just so tough.
It is so hard, and you want to protect them. I think one of the hardest stages of the disease, honestly, is when they are still aware that they are losing some of their abilities and some of their cognitive skills, because you see them struggling. And if particularly maybe of a certain generation, they're proud of how they present themselves in public. And when they can no longer mask that and they're still aware of it, it is painful to see that, because while others may not be judging, they feel judged. And it is very hard. It's a self-consciousness that broke my heart again. And I wanted to shield him from any and all of that. And it's hard to rationalize or even understand, but you almost feel relieved when you get past the stage of their acute awareness of what is happening to them, because now at least they're no longer struggling with their own realization of what is.
I'm so glad you brought that up, and you are probably giving people words to what they are feeling around that relief. That's not something that I think we openly share, but it's so real, and it's so important that out of that protection for our loved one, we have a little bit of relief when that transition happens, because you know that it hurts them so much to lose our own ability to do those things and make those decisions like we used to.
I agree with you. I
Hmm.
agree.
You talked about some of those statistics a little bit earlier and the truth of Alzheimer's, and what are just some of those staggering numbers that we know are out there. I think it just gives us an understanding of really the scope of why we're having this conversation and why there's such a need to support families.
Yeah, I think it's really what we're experiencing today and what we're seeing in our landscapes, in our communities, our neighborhoods, and our families. Because I always say, no one is immune. We all have a dog in this fight, because if you don't think you have a connection, and I would challenge most everyone that they do, either in their school or their workplace or in their neighborhood. But even if you think that you've somehow been insulated, I guarantee as a taxpayer, you still have a vested interest in what is happening with respect to this disease. And that's because of the sheer price tag that comes with the long-term care that is required for our loved ones, as well as all of those caregivers, particularly in families where people are no longer working and staying at home for no money to care for their loved ones, which if they're in that ability and they have that position to do that, that's a gift. Not everyone can, but there is a cost to society of those people no longer being able to work outside the home. So it's staggering. And again, every number equates to a person. So of course, as I mentioned, there's 6.5 million people in the United States right now living with this disease. And then you exponentially increase that when you consider that they have partners who are caring for them in many cases. They have children, they have siblings, they have neighbors, a lot of whom in their immediate circle or their immediate village who are also affected by the day-to-day. Similarly, in Minnesota, we have more than 100,000 now here just in the state of Minnesota. And that is, each state has their numbers, and it's staggering. I mean, places like North Dakota, Wisconsin, less populated, they all are racking up into the tens of thousands despite the lower populations. Beyond that, the global big picture and the World Health Organization has been a little consumed by the pandemic recently, so they haven't updated some of their numbers recently, but 55 million people overall throughout the world that we know of who are dealing with dementia. And then you consider that when you say dementia, of course, Alzheimer's is 60 to 70% of dementia. So that's at least 33% dealing with Alzheimer's. And you recognize, well, other dementias, Lewy body, vascular, all frontotemporal, they all present similarly. They all have similar journeys. So regardless of what dementia, it all comes with similar struggles. Not to mention, some of the countries in our beautiful world don't have the healthcare system that allows them to track the cases of dementia that we have. So while that is awful, I think what is even more, and forgive me, I don't mean to be melodramatic, but I think it is terrifying is what's going to happen in the years to come, particularly as our aging baby boomers do in fact age. So then we're looking at that, 6.5 million that we have here in America today, that jumps to 14 million. And that's a dramatic jump by 2050 that makes a significant difference in the ability to care for them effectively and with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And similarly, I talked about the cost issue. We're at about 283 or so billion, according to the Alzheimer's Association. That goes up to $1 trillion for our country alone that we'll be spending on this disease. And that is so dramatic. I mean, you can put it in several different terms. You can stack it up and you get a quarter of the way to the moon. And it's more than the GDP of Norway. It's like all of these, it's a staggering amount of money that will actually and could actually bankrupt Medicare and Medicaid if it's not stopped. So, there's promise for research, but that promise is still not the silver bullet that will stop it in its tracks. And so it's really hard. And I think sometimes when you get lost in the numbers and you think, oh, that's a lot, all you need to do is know that with each number, it's a person. It's whose life has been fundamentally changed, their last chapter completely rewritten in a way that they had never envisioned or wanted. And it's the effect on all of their loved ones around them, emotionally, physically, and yes, financially also.
It's immense. And you so eloquently spoke to all of those concerns that we're having conversation right now in the care economy space, how it's impacting the workplace and those caregivers needing to leave the workplace or productivity that's happening. The cost of care is such a major focal point right now. It is astronomical. It is challenging families in ways that they've never imagined. The relationships, how it impacts our families and our community. There's so many conversations that we need to keep having to drive that awareness and conversation. And all of this, you decided to create a company called So Many Goodbyes. And we've heard the term the long goodbye, but I really love how you shifted that to so many goodbyes because that's exactly what is happening. And it's an accurate description of what we go through as a family. What are all the goodbyes that you and others have to walk through?
It is so hard. And I organically said those words. I don't want to say came up with it because no one wants to come up with anything in this
Right,
area. I
right.
organically stumbled on that description once when I was talking with a friend who is a radio host, and it happened to be on her program. And I said, it's often called the long goodbye. And I said, but I always call it so many goodbyes because I'm saying goodbye to the dad who raised me. I'm saying goodbye to the man who could skate anyone and who was a phenomenal hockey player and who ran marathons and played golf and did all this. I'm saying goodbye to the man who recognized me as his daughter. And it's a constant state of grief that people go through. And it's hard to compartmentalize, and it's hard to accept that this is my new reality and this is my new relationship with my loved one, because you're saying those goodbyes and you want to give each day of grief its due. At the same time, there is something in me. I know when I was on the journey, the Alzheimer's community, I think when you've been on this journey, the Alzheimer's or any dementia journey, you feel part of a family because there's a unique understanding and an empathy that comes with knowing what it's like to say those goodbyes, what it's like to go day in and day out and not know if you'll actually find the person who you love so much before or beyond this disease. And sometimes my family, my Alzheimer's community would reach out to me and say, Karla, just still savor, enjoy his smile and that sort of thing. And I would appreciate what they'd say. And I would do that. And I would again had the ability, flexibility, and privilege to be by his side on a regular basis. And I was grateful for that. That said, I will say, I think I didn't know enough about how to really try to enjoy and savor the moments, savor the joy that comes with holding his hands, that comes with looking into his eyes, even if they no longer recognize me, that comes with being able to say to him, I'm still here, you're not alone, I love you. I mean, just those moments of joy, they seem small compared to what you've lost, but they matter a lifetime's worth when you no longer have that there as well. So it's that those of us who've gone through the full journey, we keep trying to impress upon those who are on the journey today. Like when we raise our babies, we say the days are long, but the years are short. The same applies to this journey. So really trying to purposefully and deliberately, intentionally focus on those moments of joy you still have with your loved one, even despite the goodbyes and despite the grief. And I think it's just a real challenge for us because it's inherently not what we feel called to do.
Right, it is. It's so hard. How did you learn more about the disease or how to interact with your dad in those purposeful ways? I know you had mentioned the Alzheimer's Association, but was there like this guiding light for you that made it a little bit easier each day?
I'd say there were several guiding lights, honestly. And I think this is where the intersection of my roles in life really play a part. So I was obviously daughter in this role. I had become a mother. I was caregiver. I was as much a hands-on caregiver as my schedule would allow, which was at least as several times a week that I would be with my dad. And I was also a reporter by skill and background. And so I think by virtue of being able to interview and interact with our experts in our community, whether that's Mayo Medical Center, the Health Partners Medical Community, the University of Minnesota, our local chapters of the Alzheimer's Association, AARP, you name it, we are blessed in this particular region with a lot of really good medical leaders, particularly related to Alzheimer's and dementia research. So I was able to kind of leverage, if you will, my relationships on a professional level to really understand more and more, both the parallel tracks of the research and what was happening in that field, but also what was working in the caregiving field. And I will say that my experts in my universe, they range from the top in neurology at Mayo Clinic to those caregivers who were phenomenally gifted. We had one caregiver in particular, we call her Angel because she was so innately gifted in how to reach people with this disease. She didn't yet have a college degree, and yet she knew how to care for my dad by being patient, looking in his eyes, being slow, explaining to him what was happening, and recognizing that some of these actions and services are very vulnerable and private. And so by treating him with respect in those moments, she was able to have so much more success and efficiency and keep herself safe throughout this difficult journey as well, and ensure that she had good days with my dad that also filled her cup. And so I learned from all of these guiding lights, I would say, people who I just kind of would take back and absorb their knowledge and understand what they were doing as well. We had several of those caregivers, Ashford, who would get my mom and dad out of the house and make sure that they still were living. Stephen, who was a young man who was just energetic and would try everything. Sometimes his enthusiasm would be too much for my dad, but he didn't stop trying. And I just, I valued each and every person and what they could add. And I really soaked it up. And that's part of where and how I started developing my own knowledge base that, yes, I was researching, interviewing, and connecting as a reporter, but I was also learning by doing as a caregiver myself, and learning and witnessing by watching as a daughter.
Yeah, what an incredible network that you have around you. And it's so true. We learned there have been incredible people that were caregivers for my grandma. I visited a woman in an assisted living. Her family traveled quite a bit. And so I was that companion, and I would learn from her caregivers. And we learn from people around us, or how they could interact and pull out pieces of their personality that I wasn't able to do yet, but then witnessed that and then took that. I'm like, okay, I'm going to store that away. I'm going to remember that. It's just so cool when we're open to learning and receiving other people's gifts and insight, that we can then take that with us. And with so many goodbyes, okay, so tell us what it is and the work that you are up to shine a light on this disease.
Thank you again. So yes, I think the biggest part is the communication aspect. And when I ended the journey, again, I had to step back, and I was exhausted, and I collapsed physically, but emotionally as well. And when I was able to get my energy back and to just kind of reflect what just happened for the last decade of my life, I realized it shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be this hard to connect dots. It shouldn't be this hard to know that you're not alone. It shouldn't be this hard to navigate the resources around you. And so I thought to myself, what can I do to help people who are on this journey today, recognizing that millions are? And I started designing my company. I will note, before I talk about the services, that after I created it, I wanted to make sure it wouldn't add to the noise, because caregivers and families and those on the journey have no time. Our bandwidth is full when we're on this journey. So I wanted it only to be of value. And it was only after being affirmed by friends and contacts in the field, no, go forward. This is what we need in terms of communication and connecting dots, that I actually decided to do the full launch and go forward with it, because I wanted to make sure it would in fact serve the people who most need these services and who are on the journey today. So what I first and foremost do is speak loud, often, and in every venue you can imagine. Typically, it's a lot of conferences. Increasingly, it's workplaces, it's organizations, it's clubs, it's places that, again, may know of this disease because it is being talked about a little bit more, but don't know necessarily the full scale of how it affects all of us in our community, and what that means from a personal family perspective, and what it means from the global perspective. So I kind of throw out some of those, context statistics and data points, but then I also am very careful to give some hope, and to say, despite this, challenge and the caregiving crisis that we are experiencing in terms of the lack of caregivers going into this field, that despite all of this, here is the hope that exists today in your village, in your community, in terms of the organizations, in terms of some of the hands-on skills and actions that you can take, whether you are a member of the village, whether you are a family member, or whether you are a professional caregiver. Here are some of the strategies that will work. And then, here are the places that you can go to for further assistance. So I do that within those larger venue kind of presentations. I also give workshops, again, trying to recognize and work with the people who are doing this professionally, who are amazing and are true heroes in our community, and who are sometimes underpaid and undertrained, and doing this tirelessly through a pandemic and having to help so many families. And sometimes, because families are so stressed by the cruel disease, sometimes the communication from families can come out sideways. So trying to, share with the caregivers, what it is that families are experiencing, and providing some of that perspective from the family perspective, but also reinforcing the bridge and the communication between caregivers and families. And again, speaking to caregivers to honor and affirm them and to listen to them, but also to share some of the strategies and skills and insights from a daughter's perspective, and also from that kind of expertise perspective. And then similarly, I do the same with families, and I remind them of the incredible work that these caregivers, professional caregivers, are doing on behalf of our loved ones without that previous connection to that person, which is remarkable. So just, trying to encourage them to reach out in an effective and respectful way. And finally, I just continue to work with families too. And I provide mentorships just to make sure that families know they are not alone, and to help kind of listen. I describe it as a one-way support group. I'm here to listen. And then I try to point them in the direction of resources available to them within their community, whether that's support groups or day programs or whatever it might be, depending on where they're at in the journey.
Yeah, which is what we need. We just want that person on the other end of that phone call or visit to hear us, and a place where we can share those frustrations with someone that really understands it. I think that's what's hard, is when we're talking with our friends or our, community, they want to be there and they want to support us, but oftentimes they don't truly understand, the road that we're walking on. And I appreciate your mindfulness and not wanting to add to the noise, and you do not. It is so needed. I'm glad you pushed through and decided to bring this out into the world, that we share that focus of hope. I think that's so important, and I appreciate your lens on what you do. I was listening to the words you were saying, hope and purpose and affirm, and all of those descriptions of what we really need when it gets really, really hard. And as families, I think when we're in it, we feel like, we might be the only one at times. And when you're mentoring families, is there some things that stand out as where their pressing needs or concerns are when they're in it? Is there like a theme to some of those discussions that you're having?
There are similarities. Every person is different, of course. Every need is different based on their personality and where they might be at in the journey when they're reaching out to me. But there are similarities, there are through lines that I can certainly relate to that everyone who knows this field can relate to. It's my mom or dad don't want to accept the help. They want to continue living. They don't want anyone coming into that. That's something we hear often. And so trying to, talk about the communication strategies that come with wanting to ensure your loved ones remain safe while still protecting and seeing their independence and their dignity and their respect. So, some of those are very consistent in terms of the storylines. And then just, it can vary even by location. I live in a greater Minnesota, for example, community. What is even available to me? And so then just having to navigate and look at what are the resources within that smaller community that's a little disconnected, if you will, from some of the more urban resources that are available to people who live closer to the metro. So just looking at what kind of strategies and skills and resources might be available to them. But I'd say communication is often a big one. And it's because people are so troubled, and I relate to this. I struggled with wanting to give my dad what I knew he needed in terms of support and additional care, even at those earliest stages, whatever medicine, Aricept that was available, just recognizing that there were some things that we could do that we weren't yet doing. And I struggled with that communication, but so I have nothing but empathy for the overcoming that hurdle. So just really helping to problem solve and how to effectively communicate, keeping them safe, but still respecting them and
Yeah.
still seeing their dignity.
It's navigating all of those unknowns too when we haven't done something before. So to have that mentorship to be able to give us, okay, you've walked this road, you can help. While we're all unique, but there's that general guideline through it. And sharing your story has really opened the doors for others to be comfortable to share theirs and have a place to do that. Because we were just talking about hope. How are you hopeful that this movement of awareness around Alzheimer's, what initiatives are you seeing in this space?
I think, I think it is easy to get a little discouraged when we look at the number of caregivers that don't have and what we will need. But I continue to be hopeful every time I meet a committed caregiver who's doing this work and has the passion and the love for it. I remain hopeful that I interviewed the head of long-term care and aging at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health shortly after, or as people were starting to reunite with their loved ones after the required isolation during the pandemic. And he said, maybe there will be a silver lining with this pandemic, that we as a society will see that we have poorly invested in elder care. I don't know if we've done that yet, but I remain hopeful that we will, because I think crisis will come to our doorstep and it will require that we do. I do remain hopeful in families and advocates and the community overall, talking more, sharing more, bringing together the resources more so that people on this journey today, what is such an isolating journey, can know that they are not alone, that they are surrounded by people who've either gone through this or are going through this today. I remain very hopeful by how much we are talking about it, particularly in contrast to even a decade ago, let alone decades ago. We are talking about it much more. And I do reserve hope for the medical science, because I will research that on a regular basis. I always do a story, even with my station, when there's a real breakthrough that's promising. And recently, the FDA gave a preliminary approval for another medication. And, it has a mixed bag and efficacy and that sort of thing. But what I think is interesting is when I interview a neurologist, and there's one who I adore. He happens to be at Health Partners, and he also happens to have been my dad's neurologist at the end of his journey. But he's a phenomenally and well-known Dr. Michael Rosenblum, well-known throughout frankly, the world in this field. But he's predicted that it could end up being an HIV/AIDS kind of solution, where it's not one medication alone that will serve as a cure, but that it might end up being a cocktail of medications that treat the various symptoms and signs of this disease, that tackle the tangles or the plaque or whatever you might be looking at with respect to how the disease presents. That's encouraging to know that medical science is going forward. So I do have hope with that. I don't think that ever we should just focus on the science, because the crisis is here. And these people on this journey today deserve our love, our care, and respect. And frankly, whatever happens in those laboratories won't be in time for our loved ones today. So we need to focus on the caregiving strategies. So that's why I kind of split and divide my hope into two different areas, because you can't just focus on one. You must have the other to be practical and honest with yourself.
It's all of it.
Yeah.
The fact that you have access to all of these professionals is life-saving, I'm sure, for lots of families, to know that you're asking the hard questions and discovering that information. You are in a unique position as a journalist, which is so cool, and a way that gives real information into the hands of all of us. So I'm so thankful that you are doing that work. And a fun story you did, this is kind of like off the cuff, I saw was about the fire and ice trend, which is such a big thing right now. I know so many people that are cold plunging, but you also touched on a little bit about, does it have any impact on our brain health, or possibly, the delayment of Alzheimer's disease? What did you discover? Is there any correlation? We don't know.
There is correlation, but they said, of course, the big rule, the scientific standard is correlation does not imply causation, right? So there is the challenge. They see some benefits. They did this long study in Finland with about 2,000 men, and they saw that over the course of 20 plus years, that those men had far fewer cases of cardiovascular or dementia cases. So it was very promising, but again, they did not control for how else were they living. And the fact that they were engaged in cold plunges and saunas and that sort of thing, could imply or suggest that they were also eating well and exercising regularly and getting good sleep and avoiding excessive alcohol and other drugs or smoking or whatever. So it's hard to separate all of that, but they have seen some promise with neurodegenerative diseases and that healthy lifestyle. That said, it hasn't been specifically studied in a way to say, yes, definitively do this and you're good to go, because it just hasn't been studied in that kind of scientifically foolproof way. And the one thing I will say is, when I did that story, the professor or the doctor who I interviewed, she just very eloquently stated, the one value that has been absolutely studied that we know is of scientific medical value is the fact that you're engaged in a social activity. Usually those are somehow group oriented. Maybe it's a girls' night, maybe it's a family thing, whatever it might be. It's a social connection where you're bonding with other people, and social connection alone is proven to boost your mental health and also ward off some of these really awful diseases. So there we do see correlation and causation.
Yeah.
So maybe there's still hope.
Good. We'll pull that out. Yeah.
Yeah,
I just thought
know.
that was fun. I was like, oh, I love that you were kind of connecting the dots about that.
I know. And I'm always looking for, Mediterranean diet. Is that what I should be doing? Okay, check, I'll do it.
What are all those things? Yes. Where can we learn more? Where can families connect with you and discover all that you are doing?
Well, thank you so much. You can go to somanygoodbyes.com, which is my website, and lays out a little bit of what we do and the services that I provide, the outreach, and how you can reach me if you're interested in a workshop or for me to talk to your community, but also if you're interested in mentoring. And then also it lays out part of my family's journey. And I was able to include a lot of my Facebook and other posts where I really laid out, while my dad was living, how I was feeling at different moments. And I also include on that website links to our stories. And so, as we've mentioned, I'm a journalist, and I ended up over the last few years of my dad's life doing a story I never ever wanted to do as a journalist or as a daughter. And we documented my dad's journey, and it ended up as a story and also an Alzheimer's special that we shared on the NBC affiliate here in Minneapolis. And that also is a way to learn more about what I experienced personally, and both my inspiration and reason for my mission today. So you can go to the website, and then So Many Goodbyes, or Karla Hult on my social media channels, I should say, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it, LinkedIn.
Yeah, I love it. It's so fun. We can connect with people in so many different ways and consume information. This has been a joy, and I've loved talking with you, learning from you, and I am excited to continue the conversation and be in each other's world. So thank you so much for your time and your story and wanting to make the world a better place with supporting our families. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having these conversations and for reminding all of us we are not alone. This means a lot to families like mine and families like yours.
Thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.